Thank
your work.
you.
So this is a real great privilege to interview you for A Doll's House, and I was lucky enough to see it at the Lyric Hammersmith with my
Oh,
mum,
oh,
and she
did
loved
you
it.
enjoy
And
it?
I loved it. Yeah, she really did. My mum rarely goes to the theatre.
Yeah,
She's not really a theatre buff. I mean, I grew up in a household where we didn't understand what the theatre was, so
yeah,
it was
fair
one of her
enough.
very first productions to see, and I wanted her to come and see it because it's a South Asian story, and they're so rare,
Yeah, they
so
are,
far
aren't
few. Um,
they?
and she loved it. She absolutely did, and so did I. I mean, just your production in general. I think the writing was it's just highly innovative and original, and gutsy, um, and just really bold. And what I loved, and what my mum loved, that it was from the female perspective, and
Yeah,
you don't really hear stories like that anymore. Um, and kind of, I think you kept so close to the plot and structure of Ibsen's original play, but it was a contemporary modern day adaptation, um, and you enhanced and not not detracted from Ibsen's Norwegian original
mm,
play, and you built on the tension and the shock of the original when it was written back in what 1879 was it? Yeah, where you
absolutely
set it
right.
and
Spot on.
yeah, yeah, and and it's interesting that you set the play in 1879, but in
Yeah,
Kolkata.
yeah.
And kind of, I think my first question, just to open up the discussion,
Mhm.
is what was your process of adaptation? Why were you initially interested in translating that play specifically out of all the other Ibsen plays or any other classics that are available to you? And kind of, what was your relationship to the original text? Did you adapt it from an adaptation like an English adaptation, or did you go back to the original Norwegian writing?
Yeah. Well, when I answer this, it's going to sound really blasé and a bit flippant, but
I'll go for it.
basically, I was asked several years ago by a very favorite radio drama producer of mine, would I put some ideas forward for an adaptation for Radio 3. And so I was like racking my head, and I was like went through all my books on my bookcase and found um, this translation of A Doll's House. And I
Mm.
said, "Oh, I'd like to do A Doll's House." So, and she
Okay.
and she went. I mean, I did know it. I did love it, and I had seen it and read it, so it wasn't that flippant. But basically, it got commissioned as a radio drama play back
Yeah.
in 2012, I think it was, and and I wrote it, and it got produced, and at the time we had Indira Varma playing Niro,
Yes.
and Toby Stephens playing Helmer,
Yeah.
and it was exactly that it was set in Calcutta. Now, when you say what did you start from a translate? I mean, literally, I just had a book on my bookcase,
Yeah.
and it happened to be one of the last books my father ever gave me
Wow.
before he died. And I don't even know why he gave me that, but it was like his inscription was on it. So
Yeah.
I think it was just a penguin or something like that. So I literally worked from that. So it's really not that academic.
Yeah. But there's a
So
sentimental attachment, I guess.
it is, yes, yes. He wrote inside, he said, "To my lovely daughter, this is one of my favorite plays."
Wow.
And so I guess I must have picked it up because it was one of his favorite plays.
Yes.
But then what happened was the adaptation for radio worked so well. Sometimes you adapt things and they just seem to magically have,
Wow.
they have a magic. And
Yes.
it did very well, and it won an audio drama award. And it was in fact Indira Varma who said to me, "You know what? You should write this as it was originally as a play."
Yes.
And of course, I thought, oh, well, if Indira Varma says I should do it, I should do it.
Yes.
And I did, and nobody wanted it. Nobody was interested.
Yeah.
As to why I set it in Calcutta, it's just literally because my family are from Calcutta. And
Yes.
so I know that city so well. I mean, I was born here,
Yeah.
but I was sent back there for de-Anglicization process every year.
Yeah.
So I kind of sort of semi grew. It's almost like a holiday home, isn't it? Like you go back
Yes.
every year. Your parents try and inculcate some Indianness into me
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
So I speak Bengali. I knew Calcutta really well, And I was also fascinated by the whole subject of colonialism, obviously.
Yeah.
My great uncle was a freedom fighter. He was hanged by the British in 1931.
Uh,
So the family come with, the whole historical analysis of colonialism is sort of deeply inbred in my, upbringing.
yeah.
Um, so,
And it's
but having said
that's
that,
you as well.
yes,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's another story. I mean, how long have we got? So
As long as you want.
I wrote, I wanted to write something about colonialism, but I didn't
Mm.
want it to be about nationalism in terms of Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru and everything, because I felt like I'd already done that, and I wanted to keep it slightly before the beginning of Indian nationalism,
Yeah,
which is
because you
why I
set it
thought,
you set it in a place where Queen Victoria was just crowned as Empress of India.
yes, she
Like
just,
right at the beginning.
Disraeli had just,
Yeah,
I can't remember I think it was something like 1877.
something like that.
Disraeli proclaimed her as Empress of
Empress
India.
of India. Yeah.
Um, I also saw a film by Satyajit Ray.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you've seen any of his films, but there's this film called Charulata,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and it's basically it's about a bored housewife basically who falls in
Yes.
love with her
Um,
brother-in-law,
yeah.
and she's virtually caged in this house in Calcutta, and she's got these binoculars that she keeps looking out into the street, and I love that film. And
Yes.
I always thought that was like Nora in A Doll's House,
In the
where she's
doll's
trapped
house.
inside the house,
Yes.
that sort of middle class Indian high caste woman who can't really go anywhere.
Yeah, unless she's got a chaperone.
Exactly. And in Charulata, in Bengali, the two the men are discussing Disraeli,
Uh-huh.
and him having made the Queen Victoria the Empress of India. And I thought, oh, I could nick that.
Yeah.
So it just places it, doesn't it? I mean, when you talk about setting it in Calcutta in this time, unless you kind of land it with a specific reference, historical reference, it doesn't quite. Somebody's in a sari, you don't know where they're from. But the minute you say Disraeli, you kind of go, oh, well,
Yes.
hopefully you do, or you want to know who Disraeli was.
Yeah, there's a sort of relatability there because you hear
Yeah,
names you recognize,
yeah,
and then automatically you're there in the
yeah,
environment because you know of the history.
yeah.
Did you? I mean, reading the original Ibsen's play, did you take anything from the original story, and how did you honor it? I guess, and how did you transform bits? How did you honor certain bits, and how did you transform certain bits? And was
Well,
that difficult?
no, because basically the great thing about adapting is that when you've got a classic play like A Doll's House, it's all there. You don't have to
Yes.
worry about the plot or the characters or where's the turning point or anything like that because it's just there. And I
Mm,
remember talking to David Land, who used to run the Young Vic many years ago. I did an adaptation of Hobson's Choice for him, and he said to me, "If you're going to adapt anything, do it with love and
yes.
respect." And he said, "You don't have to rewrite the whole play because the play's already there.
Mm,
It's about injecting yourself into the play and making
mm,
it your own, but doing it with." He kept saying, "Do it with love." And I
mm,
kind of I heard what he said with that because I think the original is so brilliant.
yeah.
Why mess with it too much? I mean, obviously I did mess with it, but it's that thing of actually when you look at it, a lot of it is the same. A lot of even the dialogue
Yes.
is the same. But if you place it in a different setting, you can say something very new about it. Um,
Yeah. I feel like the
I
second. I feel like the second act
yeah,
cleaves closer to Ibsen
yeah,
um, than the first. I feel when reading it, I felt like you did take some creative license and develop this story and these characters, and then towards the end, it's interesting because I don't know, Nero leaving at the end
mm,
um, felt like quite a feminist cry,
yes,
which I
and I
don't.
think it. I think it
Sorry.
always was, wasn't it? I mean, that
Yes.
door slamming at the end
Yes.
is like it reverberates throughout history, doesn't it? Throughout the century, this woman leaving, and not just leaving her husband, but leaving her kids as well. I mean, absolutely scandalous.
Just giving up everything she knows
Yeah,
to
yeah,
have freedom. You know,
yeah,
one would expect when you're at home and you're with your loved ones that you have some sort of freedom, but actually she doesn't. She's boxed. She's closed
mm,
in. It's only when she's set free. Well,
yeah,
she takes the decision to set herself free that she
yeah.
feels she is loved, I guess, or she is loving herself. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a brilliant play. And I remember when I was asked by Rachel O'Riordan at the Lyric, Hammersmith, do you have any plays in your drawer? And I went, yeah, I've got this. Nobody wants to put it on. And she read it and immediately went, I love it. I want to put it on, which is
Mm.
like a dream come true for a playwright because
Because
that doesn't normally happen.
it was the inaugural play, right? At
Yes,
the opening play of her first season as
exactly. But what she did
actor.
say was that you can go further. You've been too
Wow,
loyal to the original. Take
nice.
it further.
Yeah.
And so that was really nice. That was licensed to kind of. So, for example, the maid in the original Ibsen is not as big a part. I mean, she's still there very much. So she talks about having looked after Nora and having brought her up and having left her own child behind to look after Nora. And I thought
Yes.
that's so reminiscent of the servant classes in India who leave their own children behind to go to the rich houses to look after to nanny, basically.
Yes.
And I think both in Chekhov and Ibsen, there's always these servants, aren't there, who are the sort of moral center of the story, but they still don't really have very many lines. So I wanted
Lines.
to make it, yeah, I wanted to make it slightly bigger. She's the real Indian heart of Neri's world. I think
Yes.
she watches her praying and burning her joss sticks and all the rest of it.
It's interesting because in the original, Ibsen tackles widowship, and you tackle widowship with Lahiri's character in your adaptation too. And it's interesting how the two coincide, and there are very similar views, even
Yes.
though even though they're set in very different countries, I guess. Um, how did you go about developing Lahiri's character? Because as you said, you've given her more weight in this play than, say, a very similar role in the original.
Well, I gave the maid more weight. I
Yes,
think I think Lahiri, as in I've forgotten what her Mrs. Lint, isn't she? She's called Mrs.
yes.
Lint in the original. She I've forgotten all the original names now. She I think she's exactly the same.
Mm,
Actually, I don't think I gave her a bigger role, but
mm,
by putting her in widow, because obviously in the West, widows' weeds are black, aren't they? But
yes,
in India, widows' weeds are white.
white.
They're white and no adornment, no bangles, no earrings,
Nothing,
nothing.
nothing, plain.
And in fact, you're not even allowed to eat meat apparently. So
Yes.
you have to be vegetarian, and it's almost like you're not a real woman anymore because you're
No.
a widow. And I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, beneath all that is the scandal of what they were doing with widows right up until like something like 1830s or something, where widows were like jumping on the funeral fires of their husbands, and
Yeah.
but being burnt to death. And I mean, even now you hear of the odd
You
case.
do. You do.
So I thought that she's such a low status. I mean, it's always really interesting with plays with status as well, isn't it?
Mm,
Playing around with character status, and she is a very, very low status. So
mm.
within Indian society, she would be very low. I just thought it gives her more of a journey in terms of the stakes are high for her.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes sense.
and it
Yeah.
was an interesting twist towards the end when she becomes part of this conspiracy against Niro. And did you have that already in your mind when you were writing? Um,
I think I, the thing that I do remember about writing the first draft of this is that it is again going back to the love of the original, which is
yes.
Ibsen's plays generally, they're so intense.
Mm.
They're like really, you know, by the end of it, I was like, phew, God, that was an intense experience, you know. And
Yeah.
that was just like adapting it. That wasn't, you know, wasn't watching it or anything. And I think that um, her character, Mrs. Lahiri, is so you could. I mean, it's a great part for an actress because
Yeah.
you can go wherever you want with it. I mean,
Yeah.
is she actually complicit in Nero's downfall? Has she plotted the whole thing all the way through?
Mm.
Or has she, because she stirs the pot, doesn't she?
It does. Yeah.
And and then she gets what she wants out of it, but at the
Yeah.
end she gets a job and she
Yeah.
gets the man that she actually
Loves,
originally
originally
loved.
loved. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think she's a very complex character.
Mm.
And what's great is that, you know, you can do so much as the writer, but it's then up to the actor to take it on and then do what they want with it almost. So I think that part could be played so many different ways, and I think it's really interesting. For me, I thought she was, for my part, I thought she's quite a complicated, difficult character. But
Yes.
given her history, that she's lost everything, she married a man for money. He then died, leaving her debts. She's been
Yeah.
working her butt off all these years.
Her brothers are old, so they don't need any.
Yes.
They don't
Yeah.
need her
So
anymore.
she needs this. And she even says, I'm so used to looking after people. Again, that's in the original Ibsen.
Yes.
I'm so used to looking after people. I need someone to love and look after.
Yeah.
That's my reason for living. And actually, yeah. So in a sense, it's all there. It's all laid out there for me by
Yeah.
Ibsen. So and quite often people would turn to me whilst they're watching the play, and they turn to me and they go, "That's a great line, Tanika." And I go, "It's not mine, it's Ibsen's."
Ibsen's.
It's done with an Indian accent.
It's interesting because I think when I was watching the production, Niro as a character seemed to age as the play went on.
Yeah.
And was that intentional when you were writing, that you wanted her to start off quite childlike
Yes,
and
definitely.
like a doll, basically, something to be
Yeah.
played with and frivoled about,
Yeah.
for her to then, by the end of it, become a woman who knows what she wants, stands her own ground, and and goes with what her heart and her gut and her instincts are telling her to get.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things I was thinking about was I can never say this word, exoticization
That's it.
of yes, thank you. Oh, I can write it. It's very hard to say it out loud. The way that Indian women were almost fetishized,
Yeah.
by white colonialists, and in a sense that is a metaphor for colonialism, the way that the British treated India.
Yes.
Loved it, absolutely loved it, loved everything about it, wanted to possess it, wanted to keep it for themselves, wanted to take everything from it, and then just like, when they didn't do what they wanted them to do, they would throw them to the side. And so I felt very much that's what the whole play was for me about. In terms of my adaptation. It was like the whole thing was a metaphor. Helma is in Britain, Niro is India. So I mean, if you put it that blank, that it kind of makes sense. But having said that, you need to characterize them. You can't just say that. You can't. Then it becomes too desk thumping. So for me, Niro was very much a sort of Indian doll. She's been pampered, very much like she's in the original. But in this, it feels more. She's younger. She's a young woman, and Helma is a slightly older, not elderly, but older man. He's probably in his 40s. She's in her 20s. She's already got kids. And he just loves her as she is, as this sort of helpless little doll. So this whole growth of her throughout the play is kind of inevitable, but also we had such an amazing actor playing her.
Anjana Vasan was incredible.
Stunning. She's like, absolutely amazing. And she actually won. I think she was nominated for an Evening Standard Award. But then she lost out to Dame Maggie Smith. So
you win some, you lose some.
but I think she's an amazing character. And the great thing again about the play is that when you look at it structurally, they never leave the house.
No, they don't.
Even when she goes out to the party, and does her dance, we don't see that.
No.
We don't see her, we never see her out. So that the atmosphere gets more and more condensed and intense because
Yes.
we never ever step out of the house. So it becomes this, it's almost like it becomes a boxing ring of a
Yeah.
marriage.
Yeah.
You can always see them sort of circling each other, like taking swipes at each other in a strange way.
Yeah. I mean, Tom calls her his little Indian princess in
Mm.
your adaptation. I mean, my this interracial marriage.
Yeah.
How did you come about making that choice? Because as much as you could have, you've set it in colonial India, you could have had a Bengali woman married to a Bengali man and created a story around that. But you
Yeah.
chose to write a relationship, a partnership between a Bengali woman and a British white man who was a tax officer, worked in the tax office. How did you come about making that decision of having this interracial relationship, and why?
I'm always very interested in mixing up cultures on stage. I don't really want to just do Asian versions of classic plays. I mean, I feel like we've been doing those for years, but
Yes.
actually, it's not. It's not that it's too easy, but I just wanted to try something different.
Mm.
And I am actually myself in an interracial marriage, or have been for about 150 years. So I felt like, and with children. So I felt like, I wanted to show, I wanted to, not that I have a relationship like Tom Helmer and Niro, of course, but it's that thing of like trying to have a more diverse cast on stage. Because I feel that quite often what we have is we have Asian plays, we have black plays, we have Chinese plays, and we have, your big white plays. And
Yes.
actually, that's not how we live anymore. We are much more mixed and diverse, and all our friends are from all over the world. Not everyone, obviously, but this is so I wanted to reflect that world, but
Mm.
also I wanted it to be a commentary on, I wanted to write a commentary on British colonialism in India.
Yeah.
And you can't do that just through Asian
Asian
characters.
gaze. Yeah.
So it felt very, and of course, it was a fact that there were a lot of mixed race couples in India, that people did intermarry, and there were many very happy marriages. And there were lots of people who tried to hide their identity. So I've been reading about Merle Oberon, who was this great famous Hollywood actress
Mm-hmm.
who was mixed race. She was Indian.
Yeah.
And she hid it until she died. She never told anyone. So that, clearly there were lots and lots of marriages, but at some point it becomes not the done thing. And it's around this time at 1870s where suddenly you don't get so many interracial marriages
Yes.
between Indians and English. So there's a kind of a splitting off point. So it changes after around the 1880s.
Mm.
And I think British imperialism becomes much, much more based on superiority of race.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because these prejudgmental thoughts, these prejudices and discriminatory comments that British white colonialists had of Indian folk in the play in relation to Niru's
Mm.
prejudices and
Mm.
discrimination. Again, even Lahiri's character and the caste system, there were reading it, I felt like there were similarities, and that it wasn't always black and white. It's all very fluid, the way that people treat each other.
Mm.
I mean, when you were writing this play, did you have an idea of who you were writing for and why you wanted to write it now? I mean, obviously, a few years back.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because I often get asked, do you know who you're writing for? The only thing I think about is it's a live play for an audience.
Yeah.
I don't think about who's going to be in the audience. I mean, at one point, I remember Michael Billington once asked me, do you write for an Asian audience?
Yeah.
And I just thought, no, because if I thought of an Asian audience, that I would just see a sea of my mother's faces in the audience, and then I'd never write anything. So it's actually not, no, I think I just write for an audience to entertain and to move. And in terms of why now, I think that probably because I am very interested in history. I mean, that's
Mm,
actually what I studied at university, but also because I don't feel like this story has really been told before,
mm,
or no, it has been told before, hasn't been told enough.
yes.
And it's an interesting moment just before Indian nationalism
Mm-hmm.
starts building up. Um, it's also a time in Britain where there's a whole um, movement to colonize Africa as well.
Yeah.
So there is another story behind that as well.
Yeah.
And I think for me, one of the people that I was really interested in was Dr. Rank.
Mm-hmm.
In I always kind of quite liked him.
Yeah.
Although I think in the original, or maybe not so much in the original, all the productions I've ever seen, he's always quite a creepy old white man.
Man, yeah.
Whereas I think in mine, I wanted to make him a little bit more of an equal to Helmer,
Yeah.
uh, and and one of those British who actually felt that the British were not doing the right thing out
Thing.
there.
Yeah.
So that was the one scene I wrote. I wrote one scene which was not Ibsen,
Yes.
and that was the scene between him and Helmer right at the beginning.
Mm. It's interesting because Tom's character also has quite sympathetic views towards is it Dr. Ranj?
Dr. Rank,
Yeah, Dr. Rank,
yeah,
in the sense that he understands the trauma that colonizing India has brought, but then he also talks about the fact that the British are benevolent,
yeah.
loving. Um, I mean, how much historical research did you have to do in order for you to stay true to the history of the play or where you've set it?
Yeah,
And what was that process like? Because I mean, you've written many other plays that is set in colonial India, but why specifically this? I mean, how much research did you have to do specifically for this period? This
uh,
period?
yeah, no, I mean, whenever I'm writing, I always research as I go along,
Yeah.
and I have been known to haunt the rooms of the British Library, finding going down wormholes that take me nowhere. But that kind of, I guess I kind of already knew quite a lot of the history
Yeah.
because of all the other stuff I'd been doing, but also specifically I was looking at Indian women of that time, of that era.
Yeah.
And when I researched into, what kind of lives did these women have,
Hmm.
I was actually really, I was I was kind of surprised that there were a lot of middle class, educated women from India who became doctors and lawyers and who weren't able to practice because they were women, who went to Britain, who went to Cambridge, who went to Oxford,
Yeah.
incredible amount of, you know, that kind of stepped away from their families and did their own thing. So for me, Niro at the end will be all right. She's going to go off and probably become something amazing.
Yes.
Whereas I think for a lot of people who didn't really know about the history, I mean, I got asked by journalists, so what's going to become of Niru in Darjeeling? What's she going to do?
Yeah.
I kept saying she's going to be all right. She's
Fine.
she's gonna she's gonna go back to school and become a, I don't know,
Anything she
osteopath.
wants to be.
Be anything she wants to be.
Yeah.
And it's not that they didn't achieve. The point is that she is closed in and she is free at the end. I don't think she's going to become a beggar on the street, is what I'm trying
Yes.
to say.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting. How much of the, how do I say this? How much did you envision the creative team's kind of interpretation of the when you were writing? Do you when you write these scenes set in this house? Do you have images going through your head on how it would look, or do you write it and then go? It's up to the director and everybody else to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with playwrights is that everyone does it slightly differently. I mean, you can't really envision it completely.
Hmm.
You can talk about characters in your writing. I have no idea what they're going to do with it design wise, or
Yeah.
how an actor's going to play it. So it's very much a sort of that's what's so great about theatre. It's a collaborative thing.
That's
So
it.
it's not like you write the play and then just hand it over and go, see you later. You
Yeah.
sit in the rehearsal room, you rewrite. I mean, I did a lot of rewriting and cutting during the rehearsal process.
How many drafts did you end up writing for this? Was it quite a
How many
lot?
drafts?
Yeah.
Wasn't that many actually.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it was about 4.
Wow,
And
nice.
then what again, when you're in rehearsals, you know, the actors keep going, oh, I don't need to say this, I can do it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can actually. Let's
Yeah.
cut it. And stuff like kind of intention. So for example, with the character of Das, he's the low caste
Yes.
character. And so it was quite interesting talking to the actor about playing him as a low status who was fallen on hard times.
Yes.
So that sort of stuff is I think it's quite interesting for them to hear. But then at some point they just want the writer to shut up and go away, so that they can get on with it. And then you come back at the end and you start watching the runs, and it really is a collaborative process. And I work very closely with the director and the designer.
Yeah. Lily Arnold, wasn't it, who designed?
Yeah, Lily was great. And I kind of showed her pictures of the kind of house I was talking about, which was these old style houses that I'd seen in Calcutta, which are they're called old zamindari houses, and they've got big verandas that run out on the outside and inside,
with a courtyard in the middle.
Yeah, the courtyard. They usually have a goddess or a statue, religious icon in the middle.
Yes.
And so I knew what it was, but I think again, Rachel, the director, was very clear that she didn't want a stage full of clutter.
Yes.
So it was a very open, there was no bookshelves or desks or anything like that. So it just meant that they had a huge playground to play on.
Yeah, I mean, you just touched upon religion, and the play talks about Hinduism and also Christianity, and Niro's conversion from Hinduism to Christianity. Why did you feel like you had to make that decision? Because it was really lovely to be educated on a religion that you may not be familiar, as an audience watching it or even reading it. And did you feel like it was very important to talk about religion in this play?
Well, not in. I guess it's not that important to me, but I felt that it was important to kind of touch upon it, because I think the thing about Hinduism, it's so complex, and there's so many gods, and who knows, hundreds and thousands of them. So I thought the main thing for me was about the arrogance of the British, who always feel that in those days, obviously, felt that Christianity was the superior religion, and therefore, if you weren't Christian, you were a heathen or a pagan.
Yeah.
Heathen, I think, was the word that they used quite a lot. And there is this inbuilt arrogance of those kind of missionary style Christians at the time in India. So I think the main thing about Tom Helmer is I didn't want him to be an absolute oaf, and as he slightly is in the original, where right from the beginning he's calling her his little squirrel and this pretty little, skylark and all that stuff.
Yes.
And actually, if you put all of that in, for a modern audience watching that, they're all going, what is she doing with him?
Yeah. How is she finding any love for him?
Yeah, I know. So I had to make him slightly, we worked actually quite hard with the actor to make him kind of likable. And the Christianity thing was almost like, well, she had to become a Christian in order to be his wife. And she just did it, but didn't really think about it, and is now later on thinking, oh, I really miss doing the puja and holding the candles and, all that kind of, that cultural aspect of religion.
What I grew up with, you kind of make a sacrifice when you marry someone, and then you're in the marriage and you think, God, why did I leave all of that behind?
Yeah, I
know. Thinking that this would give me a better life, and it just hasn't. I've lost my complete sense of identity, and I think that is what this play talks about: is identity. And protecting it. It's interesting because there's a line in the play that says, I think it says, "Make England great."
Yeah.
And I don't know if this, because I remember seeing it in, was it a couple of years ago? Was it a couple of years ago? I think it was a
Yeah,
couple
it
of
was a
years ago
couple of years
now.
ago. Yeah,
And Brexit was being discussed.
yeah.
And did anything that was politically going on then influence your work
Oh,
or
totally. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. I mean, having said that, it's always like that thing where it's all in the background, it's all in the air, so you can't help but it become incorporated with, even if it's, the play isn't about Brexit, it's not a comment on Brexit, but Brexit was going on,
yes,
the internal eternal discussions. So of course it is about national identity. It is about, what is it to be British, what is it to be English, what is it to be Indian, how do we all mix together, and should this lot be in or out, or it's just endless, and it's still going on even now. um, Identity politics are very, very important to us right now,
yeah,
and but equally, what we forget is that we have actually lived together for a long time. I think that also this whole thing about Indians and Asians and Black people coming to Britain in the 1940s and on the Windrush, or in the 1960s or 70s from Uganda, the fact is there's been a much, much longer uh, kind of association between Indians and British that goes back 300, 400 years.
yes,
So that was the other thing that I was quite interested in looking at, by placing it in such an unusual setting, that you kind of go, oh, right, okay, these people are talking to each other and living with each other and married
mm.
to each other.
Mm. It's interesting because Nero's journey from dependence to fierce independence, it's so beautifully charted through your writing, and she conveys her thoughts in this wide-eyed stillness. But then I think for me, reading it, what was more really, really painful to see was kind of her own internalized racism and sexism.
Mm.
And how did you come about making that decision to make her character that, to find that flaw in her
Because,
character?
well, I mean, it's there in the Ibsen. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
say again, it's
Yeah.
already there. The way that she talks to Mrs. Lahiri when she first turns up, I mean, it's just so, the sort of somebody who's just had such a charmed life. She's so insensitive to her,
Yes.
and that is there in the original. But I just pulled it. I pulled it out even more and made it even more kind of poignant, because here's Mrs. Lahiri's got literally nothing, who turns up with just one flower in her hand to give to her, and
Yeah,
she
to see her
literally
long
just
lost
sort of,
friend.
yeah, yeah. So, and I think that those flawed characters are much more interesting than if she was a goody two shoes, a sort of downbeaten Indian woman. It just wouldn't make the same thing. So, and again, the way that she talks to to Das is so, again, condescending, patronizing.
That's it. Yeah.
You're not good enough for my husband, etc., etc. And it's only when her husband starts to talk about Das in this similar way
Okay.
that she kind of goes, hang on, that's really petty what you've just said.
Yes.
So it's a kind of it's a she kind of learns so much through these two characters. Both Das and Lahiri teach her a lot, and Dr. Rank. So it's
Yes.
almost like she grows up through the play and begins to see the light.
Yes. It's interesting with Lahiri and Darcy's character, where as much as they seem like they're quite conniving plotters, but they
Mm.
actually make Niro come to understand who she is and who she needs to be. You know,
Yeah,
and you end up. I had a lot of respect by the end of the play for Das, especially
yeah,
especially Das, because at the end of the day, he's a man who wants to get up in life. To provide for his family and to be someone that's of worth. You know.
yeah,
Um, I wanted to talk to you about the dance,
yes.
and because in the original is it the tarantella,
The
and you,
Tarantella, yeah,
yes, and you translated it into the Kathak, and how you went
yeah,
about doing that, and also the music, because I remember seeing the production and just walking into that space, the space in the lyric, and just it being surrounded with Indian music. automatically takes you to that world. And did you have that already envisioned when you were writing, that is what you wanted, or was that a creative choice that was made later on during rehearsals?
No, I didn't. I didn't think I want. I didn't think about it as a musically. But when I was talking to Rachel about the production, we talked about having live music, and Arun Ghosh is somebody that I know quite well. He's basically a sort of punk jazz clarinetist,
Yeah,
and he did all the music. So he
yeah,
played all the music on his clarinet through that production. So that felt very organic, and I love having live music on stage. It's much better than just having piped music.
yeah,
He becomes a character in his own right. And in terms of the dance, it just felt, again, it's just one of those things. I just thought, oh, well, it's got to be Gothic, hasn't it? So I come from a background. My mother was a dancer, my father was a singer.
nice.
So I know all my Indian classical dances.
Yeah,
And so for me, the tarantella, which is kind, what is it, a Spanish kind of dance,
yeah.
is very similar to Kathak, which is the
A lot of
fast
leg
footwork.
movement. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So they say that flamenco and Kathak come from the same, sort of traveling, sort of travelers, Romanis, who
yes,
dance that dance. And I remember going to see a show by Nitin Sawhney once, where he had a flamenco dancer and a Kathak dancer dancing
I
on
think
stage
together.
together
Wow,
with
stunning.
tabla, and actually was almost like indecipherable apart
Yes,
from the costumes.
yeah,
So for me, it felt very natural. The other thing about Kathak is it's used quite a lot in the Bollywood films as a
yes,
courtesan. It's always like, you've got your Rekha or whoever, or Hema Malini dancing these sort of coquettish dances where the men are all sitting around watching them,
yes.
sort of salivating over them. And I thought that would be a perfect dance for Helmer to kind of get all sexually
Aroused over it.
aroused by, because
Yes,
it is very much yeah, he would love it, and especially with the outfit and the flowy skirts.
yeah. So it's interesting because I remember watching the play and also reading it. Like Niro putting on these bells on her feet to dance felt like shackles, being
Mm,
trapped.
mm.
And this dance having a metaphor of a bird being caged and trying to break out,
Yeah,
finding that freedom.
yeah.
And I was curious to know if that was the same translation you had when
Um, no, to be honest, I
uh
just thought, oh, she does a dance, and he gets very excited.
nice.
I'm so sorry to say this, but what the actor and what Rachel did together was far, far superior to what was in my head. I mean, basically, she danced it as a puppet,
Yes.
like with a puppet on strings, and then she goes into a whirl, which is a echo of what's going on in her head. It was so much superior to what I'd written. I think I'd just written she does a dance.
So
This
I'm
is what's
reading
good.
into it a bit too much.
This is the great thing about theatre.
Here's
Other
her.
people come and breathe life into your words,
That's it.
and that was I loved watching that bit.
And it's different people translating your work in
Yeah,
different ways, and that's
yeah,
what's exciting. I mean, I must say, reading it felt like a classic. It
yeah.
felt like a play that you could go back to again and again and again, even 20, 30, 40 years down the line, the
Mhm.
way that we look at Ibsen's original text now.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and it goes to show the popularity, because I know that the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama did a production of it last autumn.
Yes, they
Um,
did. Yeah, yeah.
and I remember watching it and still getting the same feelings I got watching the Lyric Hammersmith version.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
yeah, I mean, do you have a favorite character?
Oh, well, I think it's got to be Niro for me.
Anyway, okay,
Yeah, no, she's definitely my favorite character. But I always enjoyed writing and watching Rank as well.
yeah,
Bizarrely,
yes,
I don't know why. I think it was because for me he shows hope
yes,
in the relationship between the British and the Indian.
and India,
But
yeah,
actually, if he'd had a bit more, he even says himself, if he'd had a bit more gumption. He should have been treating Indian patients as well as English patients. So my grandfather was a doctor on the Indian Railways, and
Nice.
so he was born in what, 1911. He died
Uh-huh.
many years ago. But
Yes.
what he said was that when he was treating patients, he was told he was only allowed to treat Indian patients.
Yes.
So those who worked on the Indian Railways, which was vast,
Yes.
but he said he often treated English patients because there were no other doctors around,
Yeah.
and he had to treat them, and also they wanted him to treat them. So it was like this very strange thing where there was this rule set up that you can own, an apartheid basically of who you could and couldn't treat as a doctor, as a
Yeah.
medic,
Yeah.
and yet there he was. And I felt like Rank was a bit like that he wanted to treat Indians, but he couldn't because he wasn't allowed to.
Yeah.
And it also just made me think of all the Indian doctors here. When I say Indian, I mean Indian subcontinent. I
Yes.
mean, obviously, in the context of a doll's house, it's India before it was partitioned.
Partitioned, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, writing the play, do you feel like you learnt anything doing that process?
Yeah, I learned how to. I learned the how wonderful a good structure is. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, his acts and the way that his scenes
Mm.
move, and it's always like every scene moves the plot along, and
Yes.
it gets more and more and more, and the whole sort of thriller-esque um, aspect of it. For
Yeah.
me, I just learned so much. I mean, I'm not sure that I could ever do it myself in terms of as brilliantly, but that's why adapting something like Ibsen was just such a joy, because it's so skillfully written. There
Yes.
was a lot of stuff in there where Nora talks to herself quite a lot and
Mm.
goes into a whirly-gig about what's going on, and I actually cut all those out because, again, to a modern audience, I just felt like, why is she talking to herself? We can see it.
Yes.
We can see it in her actions. We don't need to have her talking about her feelings.
But I guess it was written at a time where things were so presented on stage,
Yes,
the
yes,
gestures, and how
yes,
it's evolved now. We're more naturalistic, I guess, in our
yeah,
because of Stanislavski and Chekhov. But
yes, exactly.
but
Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting you talk about Dr. Rand, and there's a line that he says in the play that I still remember, and he says, "We've lost our humanity
yeah,
along the way." And I think with especially now when we relate it to modern day politics and what's going on in our country right now, I think that's what we have lost: this sense of community, this
yeah,
sense of love, this sense of onemanship,
yeah.
humanity. And what are your thoughts on? Obviously, you said what are your thoughts on? Because you touched upon it, but our British relationship with our Indian relationship or South Asian relationship for you personally.
At
This
the moment,
yeah, as an identity
it's
thing, because I know I struggle.
well, I mean, in terms of identity, I find it really interesting because I was brought up in the 70s,
Yeah,
and my parents were first generation immigrants. We were Indian, they were Indians. We spoke our language at home. And so my identity was always very, very clear. You are Indian,
yeah,
there's no two ways about it. But I would not call myself Indian, I would call myself British because
yes,
I was born in Chiswick, for goodness sake,
yeah.
so
West
and I
London, I'm Ealing. West Londoners, yeah,
so I was brought up in London. I went to school here, I went to university here, all those, I write in English, for goodness sake.
yeah,
So I would say that I am British Asian. But in terms of, I think it's kind of different now for this generation that's coming up now,
yeah,
because we're now 3 generations on, in terms of the Indian subcontinent. And I think that it's less easy to be quite, quite a lot of people don't speak their mother tongue.
Mm.
They don't have many links back to their own country, to their motherland, as they call it. It's
Yes.
not like, and I think that my generation, we carry a lot of the trauma of what our parents went through
Went
when they
through.
came to
Yeah.
this country.
I
So
feel like I do as well
yeah,
now.
certainly 60s when my dad was trying to get a job, and all that kind of stuff, being called names and being beaten up the street, etc., etc. I
yeah.
mean, the racism was so extreme for
Yeah.
them in a way that it wasn't for me, and it certainly isn't for my kids,
Yeah.
although it's still there. It's
Yes.
still there.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of progress, there is progress, so
Mm.
I remain hopeful. But in terms of what's going on with the government at the moment, and the sort of Priti Patel and all the sort of refugee, you know, oh, just I feel like we've gone backwards in that respect,
Yeah.
and we have lost our, well, not we, but there is a loss of humanity because everything's become so polarized,
Yes.
and communities have become quite separate, and that's very sad to
Yeah.
me.
Because the only reason why I ask is because reading this play, the themes tackled are racism, sexism, classism, still themes that are so prevalent in our society today. And so it's not something of the past, even though it's a classic
Yeah.
play.
Mm.
It's still we're still going through the same issues right now, gender politics,
Yeah,
power
yeah.
play, status, arrogance of Britain feeling like they still own everything. There isn't any type of collaboration in our politics right now. It's not. It's so
Mhm.
divided. I mean, is there? And feel free to say no. I'm quite happy with where it is. But is there something you would change going back with this play? Is
Going
there
back with this
something?
play.
Yeah.
Um, no, because I think because if you ask me that in 10 years' time, maybe, but because it was quite a recent production, I was fairly content with it,
Mm,
because I think the production that took place was quite heavily cut from the
yeah.
published version, and so I was quite happy that the published version still exists because you can play around with it, and
Mm,
in future when people do it, they'll play it in different ways. For me, there was this one line that Helmer says, that moment where he has a go at her for when he discovers the
discovers
letter.
below. Yeah.
That is the explosive moment in Ibsen's play.
Yeah.
But for me, the addition of him calling her a savage
Yeah.
was the bit where literally she looks at her husband and it's almost like a cockroach has just crawled out of his ear.
Yeah.
That she never realized that he saw her as a savage.
It's a
And
savage. Yeah.
that's the moment where it changes everything.
Yeah.
And I think it's that sort of casual racism, which even today, when people say something like, I can't even say the words now, but like for example, somebody said to me, I'm going down the pea shop.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
say the word.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at them thinking, oh my God,
Yeah.
you're a racist.
Yeah. It's crazy. And because you've looked at them one way all your life, and then all
Yeah,
of a sudden it's like,
yeah,
whoa,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Um,
And somebody asked me the other day, how long have you been in this country for? Like this. And I just thought, I can't believe I'm being asked that question. I've been here for all my life. Why am
yeah.
I didn't even respond. But it's that sort of the fact that he calls her a savage, it's just one word and it
Yeah.
just destroys the whole marriage.
Yeah.
So again, in the Ibsen, it's not just one word, it's his whole reaction.
Mm,
But I think the word savage is such a pejorative word, isn't it? That it's just
yeah.
like you can't really get away from that.
Yeah.
Once your husband's called you a savage, I mean, what do you do?
What do you do? Do you live? No. um, yeah. Oh, it's so lovely talking to you. I mean, I know. So, I mean, I know that this play is one play amongst a set of other plays too. I mean, and I have my opinion, but I wanted to ask you why you think this play needs to be taught at school, at GCSE level for drama school, drama GCSE students. Um, yeah, and why? What? Yeah, yeah, that's my
Well,
question.
I kind of think you've already said it, which is that actually the play even though it's an old play from like, what is it, 140 years ago,
Yeah,
150 years ago now.
yeah,
The issues and the themes are so prevalent even
yeah,
today, about a woman who is trapped
yeah,
in a marriage where she's completely not allowed to do anything and she's seen as a plaything. So it's not just about sexism, but it's also about the relationship between men and women. I mean, how important it is to have equality in a relationship, but also in terms of race as well. So what I've done with this play is I have layered race into it. So
yes,
whereas before it was, set in a cold country where they're all standing around a stove with mufflers and they're batting the snow off their boots. Here we're in a tropical country. It's still a husband and wife, and it's still the same issues, but it's also about race. But it's set
mm,
in the same time. And actually, what's really interesting about the play is that all those issues are totally current, as you said,
yeah,
today. Not just class, not just race and sexism, but also about class, because the
mm,
dance also represents a low, what
a
we would say a
cast,
low
yeah,
caste,
cast, yeah,
whereas here low class or a
yes,
working class
working
man
class, yeah,
who will never ever get through that glass ceiling, however hard he tries,
yeah,
because he's not because, as Helmer says, he's got bad blood,
yeah,
and
not of birth, yeah,
he didn't go to Eton,
yeah,
basically.
basically not of the right birth, yeah, yeah,
And he doesn't like, he doesn't, and he probably likes John Lewis furniture. So,
yes, yeah, yeah, and it
so
just goes to show that it's a universal play.
it's the universal
Everyone can
play. Yes,
relate to it some way
yeah,
or another.
totally
No,
relevant.
it's not an Indian play or a white British play.
Yeah.
It's a play for all.
Hmm.
Um, do you have any questions for me?
Um, yeah, I guess I would be interested to know what you think about plays in terms. Where do you think the interval should have been? Did you think it was in the right
Ah,
place? Because with three act plays, it's really
it's
hard.
really hard,
Where do
yeah,
you put the interval?
because Rachel decided to put the interval after the first act, didn't she?
Yeah, but we
Um,
tried it after the second act.
and with the first act was too, I mean, the first two acts was too long, I guess, and
Too long.
people
Everyone
were
was like,
scratching their bum, going,
yeah,
"I need to go to the
yeah,
loo. I need
yeah,
to take a break."
yeah.
Um, it's interesting. I watching it, I didn't mind
Yeah,
it being in the after the first act
yeah,
because you're
yeah,
coming back interested,
yeah,
wanting to see more. I think if it went after the second act, it would have been a bit too long. And the third act is where all the action is really
yes,
happening,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and you really want to be alert and alive for that.
yes,
Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think it's if you put it in the just after the first act, then you're coming in and you're invested for the full
yeah.
second and third of. I mean, the next 2/3 of the play. But if you put in the second act, then you're having a bit of a break and coming in all ready for the action, I guess. This has been really lovely, Tanika. It's been lovely to meet
Oh, thank you.
you.
It's
I'm
really
trying to
lovely.
think.
I hope that was a good conversation for you. Did you
Yeah,
get something out of it?
I'm trying to think if there was any other questions that I missed. I
Um, no, I think we
think
probably
I think
covered
we
it all.
covered. Yeah.
Yeah. Although next time I want to interview you.
Yeah. By all means, I love
Yeah.
talking. Um, I wanted to make a statement and see what your thoughts were on that before we
Yeah.
left, but kind of marriage
Yeah.
being an act of colonialism.
Yeah.
What your thoughts were on that? I know it's a big one. It's a big one, but
Well,
it's something that I
well,
found reading in the play. Because
um,
marriage sometimes can be quite oppressive for women, especially for South Asian
well,
women.
well, I have to say to you that I'm going to just give you an anecdote.
Yeah.
I proposed to my husband, and he turned me down. And he said, "Don't you know that marriage is a patriarchal institution based on the subjugation of women?"
Yeah.
Which is obviously an Engels quote. And I
Yes.
said, "Yeah, but if you don't marry me, my dad's going to kill you." So, so, so it's a really interesting thing, because I think that marriage is what you make of it, obviously.
Yes.
And I think if you go into it as equal partners, then it should be all right. But the whole of society is set up to oppress you as a woman if you're married. So, you know, this whole thing about changing your name when you get married, being called Mrs., you know, your kids not having your name, all this kind of stuff is like, has to be negotiated, and we have to change it, which
Yeah,
is why I think civil partnerships are so much better. That's my opinion. That's
I
not.
agree.
Yeah. I think if I had the chance again now, I would get a civil partnership
Yeah, it just gives
because
the
I,
equality,
yeah,
equal
yeah,
weight in the relationship, I
yeah,
guess, you know?
yeah.